Welcome back. So we're gonna do a little wrap up of the last few books that I read in July. Thanks for coming along with me, and as always, please let me know recommendations and thoughts on these books in the comments if you can. The book, The Monuments Men, Allied Heroes, Nazi Thieves, and the Greatest Treasure Hunt in History by Robert M. Edsel, follows the group of Allied soldiers who work to protect artifacts of historical and cultural significance and artwork during World War II. So this is super interesting subject matter. Super interesting to see how the Nazis were trying to collect and loot all this artwork during the war, and how there was an actual effort throughout the war to try to preserve these artworks and recover them and get them back to the right places. And so subject matter wise, super interesting. It's very, very well researched, this book. You know that this author is so enthusiastic and so in love with the story and the people in this book. But bless his heart, he did not know how to cut it down. He even said in the beginning of the book that he has enough to write a whole other book just focusing on Italy, and so he cut that part out and focused on the other things, especially in France and in Germany, and he will maybe write another book following all those stories. I think that was the problem with all of this. He loved the stories, he loved the letters. It was so factually based that he didn't feel like he could let go of anything, and I feel like the story kind of suffered. It got bogged down by too many people, too many letters, too much going on, and it wasn't focused enough. And so it made it hard to get through. By the end, a lot of the characters, he basically eulogized them, went through and said, what a wonderful man this was. Let me just give a little recap of his life. What a wonderful guy this was. What a wonderful woman this was. And I don't know if that's necessary at the end of this kind of book. It just felt a little much, and I just feel like it wasn't focused. Even with all the stuff that he had to put into this book, he somehow, I noticed a story that had been repeated 3 different times in the book. So obviously it was just, he couldn't focus and tell things in a concise way. So for writing, I'd give this like a 2 or a 3 stars, but for subject matter and well-researchedness, I'll give it 5 stars. I ended up with 4 stars. It's like a 3.5 stars. Very interesting. I think people should learn about this. Was this book successful? It was all right. Uncanny Valley by Anna Wiener is a memoir that follows Anna's time in 3 unnamed startups in Silicon Valley, and this is kind of written as an expose on startup culture and has a lot of good critiques on why these unicorns and these companies aren't quite all they're cracked up to be. So I enjoyed reading it. It was interesting. As a memoir, it wasn't super personal. It focused mainly on her time at work or at work functions and didn't really focus in on her personal life, so it felt a little removed. She did bring up a lot of good things about sexism in the industry and ideologies that are passed around, and just some critiques on capitalism in general and technology and its place. I didn't know if it was super successful on really fleshing out any of those ideas. It brought up a lot of interesting things that I think should be looked at, but a lot of it didn't go into depth in a way that I would have liked. I did feel like it did show a lot of the failings of these startups in regard to sexism in the workplace, and I thought that was a really good illustration on why she as a woman was devalued and why more women aren't promoted in tech companies. And I thought that was very interesting. So if you are really interested in tech companies, this is an interesting book. I don't know if it's the be-all end-all of books about Silicon Valley, and I think you should maybe look for a broader understanding of the subject, but I did appreciate some of her ideas. I just wish they had been fleshed out a little more, or that it had felt more personal as a memoir. But it was all in all, pretty okay. Okay, let's talk about The Grand Sophie by Georgette Heyer. And this is a novel that was written in 1950, but is set in Regency era London. And we have Sophie, who is a strong, independent woman who is sent to stay with her aunt and uncle and cousins to find a spouse, and while her father is off in Brazil. And Sophie takes it upon herself to fix everyone's problems and sees that the family there is making each other unhappy, but they don't need to be, and she can fix it. And it's really clever, it's really cute, it's clean, it's fun. I could be so on board with this, but there were two major drawbacks. I feel like this book had two things that just did not work with it and kind of put me off. Some of the dialogue, while it was mostly cute, it used a lot of colloquialisms that sounded less Regency era and more Jennifer Coolidge from Austenland, if anyone knows what I'm talking about there. And I feel like that kind of detracted from the tone of the book when I'm reading and thinking, do people talk like this? This doesn't sound right. I understand that people may have had different turns of phrase, if you will, back in Regency era, but I don't know if it was super successful in capturing that in this book. I feel like the biggest drawback that this book had was in the middle of the book, there was a chapter just full of rampant anti-Semitism, and it was honestly rather shocking to read, especially this book was written in 1950. You'd think straight off of World War II and the Holocaust, people would understand what damage these horrible stereotypes could have in the real world, and to perpetuate that in this book, it just feels wrong. So there's a whole chapter that describes a character that not only is a villain in the book, but it is because he is Jewish and has a multitude of terrible qualities. And I felt like that, lots of stereotypes, lots of horrible things. I was rather shocked by that chapter. I would have really enjoyed this book if that chapter had just been gone, and it makes me feel a little hesitant to ever recommend this book. Maybe just pick up a Jane Austen book if you're thinking of something Regency era, although this one was very fun other than that. So I loved the book A Good Neighborhood by Therese Ann Fowler. And this is a Romeo and Juliet-esque tragedy set in modern day in the South. And it follows two families in a fight over a lawsuit over a tree. And at the same time, the two teenagers in the families are falling in love. And so, as you can expect, it was very depressing at the end. The book really was good at having a point and some social commentary along with the tragedy that occurred, and it had a lot of good commentary on racism and the justice system in the United States and purity culture and gender equality, all sorts of very interesting and relevant topics. It felt very timely, very interesting, especially because in this story, the two teenagers fall in love and the girl is white and the boy is black, and how does that play out in today's society? I thought that that was all very excellent. I also really loved how this was written. It was told through the perspective of multiple different characters in the book, but it also had a character of the neighbors who was kind of more of our omniscient perspective that we got, and it was very much in the style of a Greek chorus from a Greek tragedy, and I thought that this actually worked really well to move the story along and make me feel more engaged with the characters and more anticipation of what was going to happen and were things going to be okay. And I thought that this was used very well in this book. I really appreciated that. So all in all, I think it's an excellent book. I did see on Goodreads that some people had problems with it being a white author writing about Black people and their pain for the benefit of white readers. And as a white reader, I don't feel like I don't have much of an opinion, or my opinion doesn't count for much on that, but I would be interested to hear more about that. Are white authors who write about Black trauma using it for their own personal gain, or are they using it to further enlighten other people about social issues? So I feel like there is a good discussion to be had about that, and all in all, like, highly recommend this book. I thought it was excellent, and I just have a box of tissues nearby.